this presentation, and Philippe, who will join this presentation with me, because without his help, we wouldn't have achieved anything. Now, before I start, I have a little question. If I want to go from here to over there, what's the first thing I need to do? I need to take the first step. And what we are presenting here is not something finished. It is something that is just starting. I don't know if there are any people over here who were present in Finland 3 years ago. Nobody? Because that was the first time I met with EAPRIL. And Philippe asked me if I could do a keynote speech. I'm actually coming from the corporate world. And at that moment I asked some questions that I found with most of my colleagues who wondered what's happening in other companies. We would like to have more information about what's happening about learning and development. And I asked EAPRIL, if they could help me, if we could join the forces of research together with the questions we had. And so Philippe said, maybe we can do something together. And now 3 years later, we do have like the first step. And that is what we call the first European Learning Compass. Even the name of this European Learning Compass is not something we invented. It was invented by the students who did it. Now, what did we really do? What do we want to present to you today? It's a compass. It's like a first way for companies to help them see more clearly what they are doing and also what's happening into Europe. And I had been a year before to the ASTD meeting, and I found that in the United States and also in Asia, there's a lot of research on learning and development. There is Burson and Associates, there is ASTD itself, there is the Hacker Group, who do interesting research on learning and development in companies. But it was very hard to find something like that in Europe. And I looked which networks exist in Europe, and that's probably very different from the United States. But in Europe there are more than 100 networks who are working in one or another way on learning and development. Some of them are regional, like every country has its network. Some of them are built on sectors, so you have a network in the finance world, in the transport world, and all of them do a little bit of research. So I wondered, should we bring this together? And we asked if it wasn't possible just to make an overview of all the research that exists and try to see if out of this we could find some tendencies and we could find some insights that we could share with people who are taking daily decisions. So the main driver behind everything was to develop in the first step an overview of existing research because based on this we would like to take a next step and see what is valuable research we can do in the future and how can our cooperation between the companies and researchers contribute to enhancing our profession, which is basically the mission of EAPRIL Learning and Development. So they went searching to many reports, and they had two important questions. First of all, bring it and map it. And the second is, can we use this data out of all these reports without doing a survey ourselves for the moment to judge and compare the state of learning between companies and countries? And we didn't find so many conclusions, but we found a few interesting conclusions. Probably it's important also to make the difference between learning analytics and benchmarks. With learning analytics, we wanted to find out how do companies measure their learning and development efforts today. And once we know what kind of analytics they use, maybe we can go towards the next step, and this step would be called benchmarking. And benchmarking would allow us to compare and would give companies the possibility to compare themselves with other ones. Now, for the moment, we focused on learning analytics, and benchmarking may be a project of the future. So the students developed an action plan, and maybe Phil, you were closer to them than I was. You can give a little word of explanation about what they did.
I'm not sure if I'm closer than you are, Patrick. But I was just thinking a minute ago, when will I interrupt you? Because we said we're going to do a kind of dual presentation without any agreement beforehand, because I just arrived 15 minutes ago. And maybe now it's the right moment to interrupt you.
Exactly.
Well, to connect to what Patrick said, in the beginning when we started this, we were thinking how can we become more interesting to companies than a lot of other associations. And the answer to that is, of course, by joining the forces between people from the corporate world and people from the research world. And that's the moment when we said, if we have continuously in different universities research teams with bachelor and master students working on topics, we will continuously generate new knowledge. And that's what we're doing at this time.
So we shake hands, right?
We shake hands, Patrick. Okay. What we see here is basically the work of the first group that were master students from Management of Learning training program at the University of Maastricht. What did they do? They made a picture, as Patrick said. They collected and coded existing learning analytics. They collected that massively. They did search for all organizations, consultancy companies, and professional overarching associations who were collecting one or another type of learning analytics to see what was there, what was known about Europe. Then they structured the coded findings, tried to identify and interpret them. They looked for differences and similarities, and then identified learning and development professionals everywhere in the world and tried to get information from them, and then compared also from an academic theoretical framework the results they found in practice with that theoretical framework. On the one side, a framework for formal traditional training programs, and on the other side, a framework for informal learning.
Remember the 10-20-70 of this month.
Jennings. Okay. But you have to click. We have to do it a bit slowly. Okay. Well, here you see where they started from. They did find initial 126 associations in a list which they approached to find out whether they collected one or another form of learning analytics. Then they searched for more associations, did find a little over 200 associations in Europe, corporate companies who collected data and larger associations, and then asked them for the materials to be able to analyze it to see what we could do. Of course, we could not get everything from all the associations. Some were very eager to give their information, their data that they have gathered. Others did not want to give it. Others wanted huge amounts of money for it. Still others wanted to cooperate very strongly with us, even offered us a lot of money to get our results from here. But okay, the goal was try to make the big picture from Europe. All this information, Patrick, all this information from the reports was collected into what we call a learning matrix. I think very shortly from now we're going to make the wonderful learning compass also electronically available on the internet, and you will have it fully in color. And also the learning matrix, which is quite interesting because there you can see which analytics are gathered from which countries are using what, which companies and associations are gathering what, and why specific information from specific companies are enclosed in our learning compass or not, because we did scrutinize all this information and see where the data come from, and on the basis of that we did make a quality check. Yeah? And some information was excluded, some was included based on the quality of the data that were retrieved. Well, that's the learning matrix. All these associations that were interested in learning analytics in organizations, starting from 126 and ending somewhere around 200, is added in what we call an association matrix for Europe. Okay, now you can go on, Patrick. Okay, I told you already, we did search for 2 theoretical frameworks because we wanted to find out whether all the data that we found, the learning analytics, could be structured more or less from starting from a theoretical framework. And the most easy thing for us to do, thinking about Charles Jennings, was looking for a good theoretical framework on formal education, formal training, and one on informal learning. So we used the Tannenbaum et al. For the formal trainings. That's Tannenbaum, Salazar Tannenbaum, the people from University of Southern Florida. What I did is a kind of review study looking at what steps and what information do you need if you do a formal training. And then you can see, of course, that before you do, of course, a training, a needs assessment, then you prepare the learning climate. During the training, you follow your instructional principles and you enable the training mindset. And afterwards, you try to ensure the transfer of your training and you evaluate it. And there you can see the workout in this model of all these different phases and the most important issues that are in there. And the idea was, can we connect the learning analytics data that are gathered to these different stages? That's for the formal training. This is the Tannenbaum model for informal learning. Here you see, of course, you know, informal learning, it's much more unintentional. It's things that happen by coincidence, etc. It's Patrick and me meeting, having a coffee, and I tell Patrick that, I use a new app for doing something, and Patrick disappears after the coffee, and he right away downloads the app and starts using it, so he learns something. So it can start with an intention to learn from myself, I'm looking for an app, but it can also just start with experience or action. I just meet Patrick having a coffee. Or it can start with feedback. Patrick gives feedback on something I did. Or it can even start with a reflection. I start reflecting on how I do things. And then I go, wow, maybe, perhaps I should do something in that direction. So informal learning, unintended, but it can start from one of these 4 components mostly, and these components do not even come one after another in this order. It can even be in a different order. Clear is that we have a series of input factors and it can have effects on a series of output factors. And if we look at the input factors, of course, the individual characteristics of the person involved is important, and the organizational, situational characteristics is the organization facilitating informal learning. So here we have a nice model where we can say, okay, we can see if our learning analytics fit into these different components.
What I found interesting when the students showed these models is that many people, including myself, are being active in daily practice. And we feel somewhere what's on there, but we don't have models to check it. And by showing these models, I start to realize, oh, that is indeed what many companies are doing, but they are maybe not aware where it is coming from. So that was the first interesting contribution. And then out of this scanning all these reports, the students found about 52 different learning analytics. This means 52 different things that associations, corporations, and consultancy companies are measuring. And they put them in 16 learning categories. And to me, being a practitioner, this was a very interesting scheme. Because with this scheme, I can go and look to other organizations and I can check, what are you measuring? What are you not measuring? And can this inspire you to measure some of the activities and results you are getting with learning and development? And maybe we can go through them. Just very quickly, 1 minute per analytics. One of the things that, and it's also in the top 3, that is measured a lot is financials. One of the reasons also why we started this project is because many times the learning and development department is working without real approval of the CEOs or the bosses of companies. So they want to see numbers. And one of the numbers that are frequently used is simply how much does it cost. It also reflects a certain view It reflects a view as looking to learning as a cost, but how much did you spend by average per course? How much did it cost in total? This is the first group of analytics, financials, that you will find in many companies, whether it's detailed or not. The second group, and this refers to the model of Kirkpatrick, the second level is, the third level actually, is do we really learn something? And if we have a course, does it, that's the second level, does it really change something in our knowledge? And that's a little bit what we've seen this morning with certification, where we are testing if the information that has been given through classes or through e-learning is really absorbed. Also, this is an analytic that we find quite frequently. The third one, and this one is already measured a lot less, is how motivated are people? Do we send them to trainings or to learning without motivation? Do we measure the context in which people are learning? So I found this interesting. A few researchers did this, but not so many. Why do people actually learn, and do we know this? Then another category, this is measured a little bit more, is how much time do we spend